Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Scales built by interval or modal distance, comparing and contrasting the major modes, those being the Ionian mode, otherwise known as the major scale, the Lydian mode, and the Mixolydian mode. So get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rocking, and we focus here on the Excel part of rocking. In a future presentation, we will actually stare at a rock attempting to be the rock to get to the rocking part of excelling at rocking. But right now, we're on the Excel part with Microsoft Excel. In Excel, if you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just construct the part of the table that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook though, 4 tabs down below, fretboard, example, practice, blank. The fretboard having a simulated fretboard that we will refer to, the example tab, in essence, the answer key. Practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay, because we're working in the blank tab, where we started from scratch with a blank worksheet, and we'll be continuing, in essence, with the blank part of the worksheet, practicing our formatting skills in Excel for formatting's sake, as well as our music skills at the same time. Let's go to the fretboard tab to get a reminder of what we're trying to do. We're looking at those intervals, but we want to have the big picture in mind and think about what we're actually doing when comparing the intervals in different modes or scales, which is what we're doing now. Remembering the visualization of the fretboard is a map of the territory. Our head is above the fretboard, above this low or heavy E string, kind of like it's in space, looking over the globe. The globe of the fretboard is rotating around. We're giving it 12 degrees of rotation, similar to the planet Earth rotating around. We're going to pick the 4th degree of rotation, that being the 7-note collection around the C major, but we could go to the C sharp, we could go to D, we could go to D sharp. All the relative positions would be the same. Once we choose a collection of notes, those 7 notes, then we don't want to be measuring by the note name, but rather by the permanent, what I would say equivalent to the continent names, that being the Nashville number system, 1 through 7, which ties out to 1 being the Ionian, 3 being the Phrygian, 2 being the Dorian, and so on and so forth. That's the best way to open up, as they say, the fretboard. But the system of the scale degrees kind of throws us off from that idea. So what we want to do now, as we compare the different scales that are within a collection of notes, view it from the proper perspective, resisting the attempt from people to pull us out of that perspective because of the naming conventions that all happened because of the mismeasurement of the scale degrees starting at 1 instead of 0, an off by 1 measuring problem. In other words, I'd like to know the distances between all of the nodes, and we can build our scale out now by basically 3 ways. One way, guitarists learn the shape. So we learn the shapes, we learn the open positions, then we move them up the guitar typically using bar chords and whatnot, which we can get into in future presentations. But we, in essence, are looking at intervals by their shapes. The other way you can do it is you can look at these 7 notes and see how to map them out by applying the formula to get to the scale whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if I go from this C, it would be whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's hard to see when you're going over multiple strings, as you kind of have to do in the guitar, but doable and worthwhile to practice. We can practice that more later. The other way to see it is by interval, which is quite practical because we build chords from, in essence, the intervals. And that's where I would imagine you put like a compass, and where you draw a circle with the compass and you put the little pointer down and then you measure around. So we're not drawing a circle in our case. We're measuring the points around that center point. So we're going to get to the same collection of 7 notes, but from the point. Remember though, I can put the point on the Ionian node and draw the circle around the Ionian node to rebuild my 7-note collection from there, or I can do it from the Mixolydian node. Now, if you use the scale degrees, when I go to the Mixolydian mode, they're going to want to call that the 1. And so then we can compare 1 through 7 scale degrees versus 1 through 7 scale degrees on the Ionian. I would suggest that that's not the best way to do it because it makes you rename the Mixolydian. Instead, what I'd like to do is just look at the distance from this point. I don't want to change the name of this point. I want to look at the distances. So in other words, if I'm at the Ionian and I think of it as a continent, if I go 2 steps up, I land on another continent. So the question is, well, what if I start on the Mixolydian and I go 2 steps up? I also land on another continent. So the question is, for each of these like islands that we have or continents in our world of the fretboard, could I go the same number of steps up? Will I hit the ocean or will I land on a continent? And it turns out that the major modes are going to have more similarities. In other words, if I start on those nodes, and the chances of me hitting a continent are going to be more similar when I look at the 1, 4, 5, which is the Ionian major scale, the Mixolydian, and the Lydian. So in other words, if I look at those 3, they have more distances that are similar, that don't land me in the ocean. And the way we typically do this is we look at the Ionian mode, and then we can compare the other most similar modes, which happen to be the 4 and the 5, to compare the distances, and we have similar distances from those points that don't land us in the ocean. And then we can go to one of the most different modes, which is the Aeolian, the 6. That's our main minor scale, and compare the other 2 to the Aeolian, which is going to be the minor modes of the Phrygian and the Dorian, because those are most similar. And then the Locrian's kind of like a minor mode, but it has a flat 5th. That's going to be the weirdest one. So that's what we do with the comparisons. Now, note that, of course, there's a flavor involved, meaning if I say something is 2 notes away, and I play those like in a chord format at the same time, you're going to have a certain tone, a certain resonance that we want to understand. But I don't want to understand it because someone says major. The M doesn't matter. The distance matters. That's the thing that should be differentiating. So I could go, this is 2 notes away from here. I'm going to get a similar kind of sound if I go from the Ionian to the Dorian. What I'd like to really remember and understand is that if I go from the modal range of an ID modal range, I have the same distance between those 2 as an XA modal range or a 5/6 modal range. Both of those are 2 notes away, which we could call the first modal half step from the Ionian node or the major scale, and the Mixolydian mode, which you can call the Mixolydian scale. See, so I want to be able to I want to be able to learn this in such a way that I know all the distances between all of the nodes. And if I rename the nodes, that's not the way to do it, right? So let's go to the blank tab. And what we did last time is we built our notes in the musical alphabet. We chose the 7 notes that we're going to be working in, which is going to be the key of C, but all the intervals work the same on the other ones as well. We chose them by applying the formula, going whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, back home. These are our collection of notes. These are the modal names that we can give them as well. And then we mapped out the difference between the scale degrees and the modal distance. So note that some people would argue, like you would think, there's got to be a reason that we do this scale degree thing. And one of the things that might come up in your head is, well, look, it's because I want to map out the scale degrees and then be able to compare all of the different scales, all of the different modes side by side. And I can't do that, right, unless I have the scale degrees. But no, you can, because again, it's just a measurement thing. Instead of starting on the 1, we should be calling it modal distances. So, right, what number of steps from that point would I have? So again, the scale degrees are all off by 1. So it would be better if we could start from scratch, or try to see in your mind that all the scale degrees are high by 1 if you measured from the node that you're on, and then you would have the modal distances, which would all be 1 note down, or 1 unit down, 1 modal distance down from the scale degree number. Noting that these distances are not the note distances because we're only choosing the intervals that land us on a continent. So now we're removing the ones that land us on the ocean because those are the ones that we don't hit as often except through the pass-through notes. So when we put these side by side, I want to list all of the distances that will land me on the continent, which we did from the Ionian. So we first looked at the modal range. And again, I think the modal range is really, really useful to see because once we know what degree that we're working in, all the modal ranges will always have the same distance. And that's really doable. You can actually learn that, right? It's not too expansive. Whereas if you learn all of the distances between all of the notes, you can't really apply that as easily to the context of any song that always has a 7-note collection generally in Western music. So we can see that as well here with the modal ranges, and then we took our measurements. So there's 3 ways that we can measure distance. One is from the modal half steps, meaning the half steps from any point that we're on. We started with the Ionian. The second, I'm going to call a scale degree, which means we make that the 1. It's always off by 1. So this one's always 1 higher. And the other is the note distance. So if I have a 7-note collection, then I can look over here to see the actual distance out of 12 notes. So those are our 3 measurement tools. These 2 are basically the same except for the scale degree is kind of like off by 1. So this is a corrected scale degree by just lowering it by 1. All right, so then we have the scale interval and the modal distance. So now what I'd like to do is just copy this whole thing out for the other 2 major modes, and that's going to be the Lydian and the Mixolydian. So this, I don't need to copy this again. I'm just going to leave that as is. I copy just this bit over, and I want to have as minimal changes as necessary in order to change the perspective of the new area to that of the Lydian. So we're going to have to do some tweaking here within our Excel formulas to make that happen, practicing our Excel skills. So let's take this whole thing and just test it out. I'm going to copy that and paste it over here and just see if it does what we want it to do. I'm going to select all of these, double click and say, okay, what do I have to change to make this work? Could I make it better? So let's make this blue just to show that I'm in a different area over here. So I'm going to say this is blue. I'm going to alternate the colors to show that. And then I'll make this one smaller. And then I'm going to say this is now going to be equal to, not the Ionian, but we're going to skip up to the 4 here because that's more similar to the Ionian than the Dorian. So we're going to go, we're going to go to the Lydian. So we're going to go to the Lydian. I'm going to left align the Lydian, which is something I possibly could do over here. I want to left align it instead of having it centered. So this should be left aligned. Okay, that makes it a little better. And then this one maybe needs to be a little bit longer so I can see it says modal range right there. And then the Ionian, this says Ionian. I need to change it to the Lydian, but notice where this is pulling from. It's actually pulling from here. So this is the key number that I need to change. As long as I change that, everything else, all this Ionian stuff should change. So let's say this is going to be equal to the 4. So now we're going to go to the Lydian instead of the Ionian. We're going to make everything relative to the Lydian. And so there we have it. Now I can see a problem down here, of course. So if I look at all the modal ranges and we measure everything from the Lydian. So we're just going to say I'm going to measure everything from the Lydian, or we can think of it from the perspective of the 4. What do I have from modal ranges that don't land me in the ocean? It could be a 4-5, it could be a 4-6, a 4-7, and then we run out of space. Then it's a 4-1, 4-2, 4-3. Imagine it goes around in a circle, right? So that's going to be the problem with our numbering. I've got to fix our formula so it goes around in a circle. In other words, it could be a YX, a YA, a YN, and then a YI, a YD, a YP. So we're going to say, all right, how can I make that work? So this one made sense. It's a YY or a 4-4, a YX, Lydian mixed Lydian, or a 4-5, a YA, which is a Lydian or a 4-6, Lydian Aeolian. It's a YN, Lydian Locrian, or 4-7. But then it gets messed up here because it went up to 8, and we need to have it 8 minus 1. So what I want it to do, if I double click, I'm going to take the one above it, add 1, but now I want to subtract 7 to bring it back down to the 1. It should be the Ionian. So how can I make that something where I can copy and paste it, where I don't have to like tweak it this way and make it a universal formula to have as minimal changes as possible from an Excel perspective? I need to do a logic function generally. So I can double click on this and say, let's delete this last bit and say, this is what I normally want you to do if you end up with a with a number below that's 7 or below. So I'm going to say if tab, and then you end up with this number, and it is, if you give me that number and it's less than 8, meaning it could be up to 7, but it can't be 8, right? So then we're going to say, then we want you to do that. Then if that's true, then I just want you to do that. So I'm going to copy this, put it right here. Then I want you to just do that. But if it's not true, then I want you to, that's the next comma, I want you to do that and then subtract 7. In this case, it's not true, so it's going to do that and subtract 7, getting us to 1. Now the question is, could I copy this down? Will it mess these up if I copy it down? Copy it down, doesn't mess it up. I can copy it up all the way up, not including this last one here, and it should work. So I can copy it up this way, and boom, it works. So that looks good. Now I also want to copy it over here and see if I can copy it here so everything is uniform, and I could copy any one of these sections over to add a new section if I need to, because they're all uniform. So if I paste that there, looks like that. Now it looks like that, but now it has the longer formula, which is more transferable. All right, that makes sense. So now these modal ranges make sense. Now I have a problem here. That doesn't look right. So if I look at the modal half-step distance, all I'm doing is saying, okay, well, what if I look at each of these nodes? If I'm on the 4 and I go up to the 5, there's a distance of 1. If I'm on the 4 and I go up to the 6, there's a distance of 6 minus 4 or 2. If I'm on the 7, 3. But what if I go back to the 1? That's a problem, because really I'm imagining the 1 is up here, right? So I need to find the distance here, which is really 1, 2, 3, 4 away. So I have that same kind of circular problem. It's like, okay, so and here we had the y minus the y is a distance, a modal half step of 0, of an x minus y, mixed Lydian minus the Lydian, is a distance of 1. Going from the Lydian to the Aeolian is 6 minus 4 or 2. Going from the Lydian to the Locrian is 7 minus 4 or 3. But the Ionian should be a distance of 4. So what do I need to do? I need to take this and once again add to it 7, right? I'm going to take this plus 7, and that should give me 4. But I want it to be universal, so I need an if thing again. So I'm going to say, let's get rid of that 7 and say, okay, well, hold on a sec. Get rid of that, not the 0. And then I'm going to put an if in front of it. If tab, if this whole thing is, that has to be greater than 0. If that's true, then I'm going to copy this. Then is the comma. Then do that if it's greater than 0. But if it's not greater than 0, comma, do that, and then add 7 to it, and that should bring us back into the range that we want it to be, and enter. There we have it. So if I copy that down, that should work going down. It does. All right, that looks right, I think, right? And then I should be able to copy this and go above it as well, all the way. Well, is it? Yeah, all the way up, I think, this time. So that goes all the way. Now, wait a sec. It goes to 7 here. That's not right. It needs to be less than 7. So I said it's going to be, it has to be, I think, greater than -1. Greater than -1. So it can be 0. So then, yeah, because that should be 0. And if I copy that down, it should work. Okay, I think that's right. All right, okay. And then I should be able to copy that all the way over here as well. So it's uniform. So copy that over here. That looks good. All right. And then these are the modal half steps. The scale degrees are all off by 1. So all I have to do is take all of those and add 1. So that should be straightforward. No problem. And of course, these are always going to be the same, right? The modal half steps are always from that point going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the scale degrees are always going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from a distance perspective, except that, right, from a modal half step, we're not making this the 1 is the difference. All right, and then if I look at the scale intervals, how is this being pulled? We're doing an X lookup by the notes. We're picking up the notes over here, and then returning the, wait a sec, let me see the, oh yeah, I see what we're doing. And we're comparing it here to the distance, the note distance, and then we're returning just the interval, the standard interval based on distance. Okay, and that's the only way to basically do it that way, because again, the naming convention is kind of funny. But from the modal distance, it makes kind of a little bit more sense, because now we can say we're actually building this by saying we're gonna take the notes are 0, then the y, and then this 0. So in other words, it's a 2 note away. So this is a 2 note away, which is that 2 from the Lydian node, first modal half step, which is the second scale degree. Okay, so that's the general idea. So that looks good. I think everything looks good there. I think I should be able to copy this over to the next one as well. Let's do a quick comparison though, and let's just note that we could like hide parts of the table to make this tighter, because notice that this bit right here is basically being repeated. We're basically repeating that here and here. So we could hide those. I think it's useful to have the 3 measurements each time so we can kind of see like what is happening and how to relate them. But if I want to compare them, we could hide a lot of this stuff, right? So I can hide, maybe I don't want like the modal ranges involved, and I want to just go from, let's just go from the Ionian here, and we want to hide all of this stuff. Right click and hide. And then over here, we might want to go from the here to here, from here to here, and hide. Right click and hide. So then I can compare these two and say, all right, what are these are 2 of the major modes, the Ionian and the Lydian. So if I start on the Ionian node and I go nowhere, then of course I don't land in the ocean, right? I'm going to have the same 0 node away from the node that I'm on. So what if I go a 2 node away from a 2 node away major second? Means I'm going to go 2 notes up from the Ionian node, which isn't indicated by the major right here. It's just that, and then it's the second scale degree, which would mean that it would be the first modal half step. So that's going to be the same for the Lydian. It would be a 2 note away major second, which is deceiving a little bit because that major makes it sound like it's like you're in the major scale. You're not. You're in the Lydian scale now, and it's going to have still a second scale degree if you make the Lydian the 1. But it would be better to say it's a 2 note away from the Lydian first modal half step, because then you don't have to make the Lydian the 1, because it is the 4 for our purposes. And then if you go to the third scale degree, which would be the modal distance of the second modal distance from the Ionian, that's a 4 note away from the 4 note away major third. Most people just say major third, but you have to know it's 4 notes away. I'd rather call it a 4 note away Ionian second modal half step, because it's 2 notes up. If you go 4 notes up from the major, from the Lydian, it's also a 4 note away, which you can call a major third, but I'd like to call it something different to indicate that we're measuring from a different place. I'd rather call it a 4 note away Lydian second modal half step. The 4 is the important thing. When I say something is 4 notes away, that's the thing that should tell me that it's in the Ionian mode and it has that flavor to it, a 4 note distance flavor. The M shouldn't be the thing telling you that. The distance should be the thing telling you that. And we all have the issue. I have the same problem of the M being the thing telling me that. It shouldn't be, because it's that the M is not giving any added information. It's not the important thing. And then we have the fourth is a 5 note away perfect fourth, which I'd like to call a 5 note away from the Ionian mode third modal half step. From the Lydian mode, This is where you have the weird one. It's a 6-note away, diminished, which should be a diminished an augmented fourth. And I should change my terminology. I'm just going to make it red though, because I don't want to get into the weeds on that. What I'd rather do is to say, look, it should be a 6-note away Lydian third modal half step, which would be the fourth scale degree. So this is, again, the naming convention is causing us a problem because I pulled this from the table. I don't want to go around in the weeds to come up with a system that fixes it, because I don't think the effort is worth the payoff on that particular one. I'd rather kind of see it this way. But in any case, the idea would be that if I go up 4 from the Ionian, if I go 3 steps up from the Ionian, I get to the 1, 2, 3, I get to the Lydian, right? And if I go from here, the C Ionian to the Lydian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if I start on the Lydian and I go up 3, 1, 2, 3, I get to the Locrian. If I'm on the Lydian and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's 6 nodes up to get to the Locrian, right? If I go up 5, I'm going to land in the ocean. So there's a difference, and the idea is, of course, simply being that if I start on any of these continents and I go up the same distance, I'm not always going to land on a continent, right? It's a different continent. We're starting from a different place, and we're going around the block. You can think about, but if I go from the Ionian and I go up the same distance, and I do the same thing for the Lydian, then I'm going to land in the ocean. It's a basic idea, right? So if I have the 5th scale degree, which is the 4th modal half step, you have from the Ionian node or major scale 7-note away, which we call a perfect 5th, and I'd like to call it a 7-note away from the Ionian node, which is the 4th scale degree. For the Lydian, we have a 7-note away perfect 5th from the Lydian, which I'd like to call a 7-note away from the Lydian node, which is a 4th modal half step. Now, again, this one says perfect, and people see the perfect and say that means it should be in most of the scale degrees, but it's really the 7 that's important. 7, lucky number 7, is going to land you on a continent. If you're going to choose, like, how many steps you have to walk the plank off of or whatever to land in the continent or the ocean, you want to choose 7 because it works most of the time. You'll land on a landmass and not in the ocean, right? But so then if it's 6, a scale degree of 6 and a modal distance of 5 from the Ionian, it's a 9-note away major 6, which I'd like to call a 9-note away from the Ionian node 5th modal half step from the Lydian, 9-note away major 6 from the Lydian, which I'd like to call a 9-note away Lydian 5th modal half step. Again, it's the 9 notes away that should be the thing that tells you what it is, not so much the major here. The major's not really adding anything. You should know that the 9 lands you on a continent. If you go from the Ionian, it's gonna land you on a continent, right? So then if I go to the 7 scale degree, which is the 6 modal distance, then we have the 11-note away major 7, which I'd like to call an 11-note away from the Ionian node 6th modal half step. From the Lydian, it's also an 11-note away major 7, and I would like to call it an 11-note away Lydian 6th modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree. So you can see there's only one difference here, and that's the point. When it's a major mode, we compare it to the Ionian because there's only one distance that lands you in the ocean, which is different from the Ionian. All right, let's do the same thing for the Mixolydian. I'm going to unhide. I'm going to select these, right-click, and unhide all that stuff. And then I'm going to see if I can copy this same thing. So I fixed these ones. So I could copy either one of these, and I should be able to do minimal changes, which is just basically the starting point to change everything. So let's see if I can copy from here. Let's copy this bit, and I'm going to paste this over here. Ba-boom. And then I'm going to make it smaller. I'm going to do, and then go double-click, make it small. And then this one I can make this smaller as well. All right. And so let's make this a little larger so I can see modal range isn't quite large enough, but that's okay. All right, and then I just need to make, and then this is green again, so that's fine. Now I want the starting point to be the 5th, or mixolydian. So mixolydian is going to be here. So 5 mixolydian, and that should change everything. Let's see. It's an XX modal range, mixolydian to mixolydian, or 5 to 5. It's an XA modal range, mixolydian aeolian, 5 to 6 modal range. It's an XN modal range, mixolydian to Lydian. It's a 5-7 modal range. And then it went from a mixolydian back to the 1 because we're going around the block. So mixolydian to Ionian, which is a 5-1 modal range, mixolydian to Dorian, which is a 5-2 modal range, mixolydian to Phrygian, which is a 5-3 modal range, and a mixolydian to Lydian, a 5-4 modal range. If I go mixolydian to mixolydian, I've traveled no modal half steps, which means if I go up by 1, it's a first scale degree, and we have 0 note half steps as well, note distance. An XA modal range is a 5-6 modal range. So if I go from 5 to 6, that's a distance of 1 modal half step. It's going to be then the second scale degree, because that's always off by 1, and it has a distance of, in notes, of 2 note half steps. If we go from an XN, mixolydian, to a Lydian, and again, anytime you see this range, the distance is always the same, right? So it's good to memorize the modal ranges, because that applies anytime you have a range. Anyway, 5-7 is going to have a 7-5, or a 2 modal half step, which is going to be the third scale degree, and it has a 4 note half step distance. A mixolydian Ionian 5-1 has a 3 modal half step, which is the fourth scale degree, which is a 5 note half step distance. Mixolydian to the Dorian, an XD modal range, is a 5-2 modal range from the Nashville number system. That's going to be a modal half step of 4. That means the scale degree is 5. The note half steps are 7. An XP modal range is a 5-3 modal range. That has a modal half step of 5, because we're going around the block, right? So it's 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. 5, 6, 7, 2, 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, and 3, 5. So that's going to be 6, and the note half step is 9. An XY modal range is a 5-4 modal range, the 4 minus the 5, going around the block. 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Wait a sec. Did I do that right? It's going 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. 6 modal half steps, 7 scale degree. Notes are going to be 10. All right. So what are the distance in this way? Let's go ahead and hide this again. I'm going to hide from here to here. Let's hide these. Right click and hide. And then I can hide from here to here. Right click and hide. And then I'm going to hide from here to here. Right click and hide. So normally we would be comparing then mainly each one of these. This is a major mode, so I would be comparing it to the major scale, which is the Ionian mode, but it will also be similar to the Lydian. So each of these, what we call major modes, are going to have one interval difference than what we call the major scale or Ionian node, which means that each of them will have 2 intervals that are different from each other. So we're going to say, all right, if I go from the mixolydian to the mixolydian, that's going to be a 0 node away perfect first, which I would call a 0 node away from the mixolydian zeroth modal half step. Then we also have a 2 node away, which is going to be the second scale degree, or the first modal half step, which is going to be a 2 node away major second, 2 node away from the Ionian node first modal half step, from the Lydian 2 node away from major second, 2 node away from the Lydian first modal half step, from the mixolydian also 2 node away major second, which is a 2 node away from the mixolydian first modal half step. On the third scale degree, or second modal half step, we have a 4 node away major third, which I would like to call a 4 node away Ionian second modal half step. From the perspective of the Lydian, still a 4 node away major third, which I'd like to call a 4 node away Lydian second modal half step. Mixolydian, still a 4 node away major third, which I'd like to call a 4 node away mixolydian second modal half step. This is the key interval that makes it a major or minor in essence. This is the major or minor flavor. All of the major modes have a 4 node away major third, Ionian, Lydian, mixolydian. We have the fourth scale degree, third modal half step, has a 5-note away perfect fourth, 5-note away Ionian third modal half step. From the perspective of the Lydian, it's a 6-note away augmented fourth. This one is wrong, but that's the interval that's different. This is the, I would rather say it this way anyways, 6-note away Lydian fourth modal half step, which would be the third modal half step, which would be the fourth scale degree. From the Mixolydian, it's a 5-note away perfect fourth. So we're back to basically normal, which would be a 5-note away from the Mixolydian third modal half step. So if it was the fifth scale degree, fourth modal half step from the Ionian, we call that a 7-note away perfect fifth, which I'd like to call a 7-note away Ionian fourth modal half step. From the Lydian, also a 7-note away perfect fifth, 7-note away Lydian fourth modal half step, and of course Mixolydian the same, because the 7 notes away is a very stable interval and will almost always land you on a continent if you start on a continent, except when you're on the crazy Locrian. So you've got the 7-note away perfect fifth, which is the 7-note away from the Mixolydian fourth modal half step. If we go to the sixth scale degree, which would be the fifth modal half step, then we have a 9-note away major 6, 9-note away from the Ionian fifth modal half step. From the perspective of the Lydian, 9-note away major 6, 9-note away from the Lydian fifth modal half step, and from the Mixolydian, still a 9-note away major 6, 9-note away from the Lydian fifth modal half step. So that one is consistent all the way through all the majors, and even one of the minors, the Dorian, has that distance as well, even though it's a major distance typically, or one common to the major modes. 7 scale degree, which is the modal half step of the sixth modal half step, it's going to be then the 11-note away major 7, 11-note away from the Ionian sixth modal half step. From the perspective of the Lydian, still an 11-note away major 7, an 11-note away distance from the Lydian sixth modal half step, but the Mixolydian has a 10-note away minor 7, which is a 10-note away from the Mixolydian sixth modal half step. So this here's the weird one from the perspective of the major modes, and these are the weird ones. That one's wrong in terms of my naming, but I'm not gonna fix it, because again, it's just a mess to try to get everything to line up properly. But it's the two names for the same interval. But this one works because you don't have the problem because the measurements anyway. And then this one is the one that has the bluesy kind of mode, making the Mixolydian kind of that more bluesy kind of a jam kind of feel for it. So that's going to be the idea. Now again, what you'd like to know is the distances between each of the modal ranges, right? That's the thing that's useful. And then the flavor for each of those distances based on the distance in notes. The distance in notes is the thing that should trigger the flavor. So if someone says it's 10 notes away, that's the thing that really should trigger the flavor, not the minor. When someone says a minor 7, that's for most people the thing that triggers the feel, that like it's a bluesy feel or whatever. But it really, but really the thing that should trigger it is it's a 10-note away 7th, right? It's a 10-note away 7th. You don't need the minor. The minor's not the thing that should be driving how we feel about it. So let's select this whole thing again and right-click and unhide. And so this is what we have thus far. We're going to continue on with this table for the minor modes next time, and then we'll reorganize it so it's in order. So we'll do that next time.